Welcome to the Cutting the Gordian Out podcast. Today we are joined by the most repeated of repeated guests, the one and only Pat Flynn, who you can now see on video right here. That microphone is closer to the camera. It's not actually the size of his head.
Dude,
Cool.
thanks for
How you been?
good, man. I'm good. I'm just glad to be back. It's always fun to chat with you, Jake. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Well, listeners, we have no plans. We have very few ideas. We kind of bounced a few things around by text, but we're going to be as surprised as anybody listening in, if there's anybody listening in.
Yeah,
We'll
Jake
be
was
about what we
desperate
remember.
for a guest, so that's when he comes to me, and he's
Like,
like, "Hey,"
man,
yeah, and
bottom
I'm
of
like,
the barrel.
so
Bottom
I,
of
so
the
I, so
barrel.
I at least floated the idea of like, "Hey, have you done like any intro to the topic of philosophy of religion?" Because I was just talking with somebody who's a history professor, or was a history professor, and I explained to him that a lot of where I focus on is philosophy of religion, but it's an unfortunate sort of title for a discipline of philosophy because the impression is it's just a bunch of religious people probably confirming their own bias, confirming their own biases, and that's just not at all what it is. So I don't know. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit, and because I think probably the truth is a lot of the questions that your listeners are interested in, good number of them anyways, are probably the types of questions that philosophers of religion are themselves asking and trying to answer. So
What do you think the top questions are? Like if somebody's like, all right, just give me some nuts and bolts. What are you guys talking about in philosophy of religion?
So obviously God's existence is a big one, but it relates more towards the general project of philosophy of religion, which is really kind of worldview comparison. People who are in philosophy of religion are not all religious people. There's many atheists in there. There's many agnostics, right? And then, of course, there's lots of people who believe in God, who may or may not have specific religious commitments or not. But what they're generally up to is they're trying to, figure out a picture of the whole, create a worldview. And some, worldviews have room for God. Other worldviews are, in a fundamental sense, committed to God. Other worldviews leave no room for God. Certain naturalistic worldviews and stuff like that. So yeah, the question of God's existence is certainly a big one, but it's also sort of like what they do is they look at data, like metaphysical data, if you want to call it that. And the idea there is like, hey, what are some like really broad features of the world that like we think a worldview needs to explain? Like that there is a moral dimension to the world, or that there is contingency, or that there are things that are composite, that the world exhibits order and stability, or even fine tuning. So it's more like, I would say, less questions as it is maybe just like identifying certain phenomena and then trying to give an explanation of that phenomena, either like a specific one or a global one, if that makes sense. But that naturally brings up like stuff like, does God exist? But yeah, I mean, like is there moral data? That's another question that's hotly debated. It's obviously not just restricted to philosophy of religion, but questions of like moral realism and anti-realism are obviously relevant there, because whether you think that you need to give an explanation of the moral dimension is contingent upon whether you actually think there is one, right?
True. That would certainly help. So I think
Sorry, I didn't answer your question. I just kind of rambled. Kind of rambled like an incoherent.
We can always start again.
This is
full
good.
of unlimited intros.
This is good. No, this is good. Yeah.
I am worried we're going to hit the same points we always have. We always hit morality, whether or not the moral argument's good. We always hit stuff about God.
Dude, I always get pulled into the moral argument, and it's like one of the ones that fascinates me the least, and that I
don't like that one.
And that I just don't care enough about it much, but like for whatever reason people are just like really hot on it. And like, dang man, because like somebody said something on Twitter today, which is never like a good start for for a podcast conversation. But it relates to the moral argument, and I have a blog I'm going to write on it. So if people really want to get my like thoughts on the moral argument, just get on my Substack and you can read what I'm going to post there in the next like day or two, and that will save us from having to go down that route again.
Gotcha. Yeah, my general thoughts on that are I'll try to put them together semi coherently. There's a lot of theists who say, listen, we have this moral landscape, we have these moral inclinations. They seem to be like ironclad. Don't kill people. There's certain things that are just like pre built, make sense. And then they want to make this move, which I totally disagree with, that says, and evolution does not seem like it would target these things. And I'm like, okay, I understand why one might want to do that. You'd say the naturalistic paradigm would not produce these results, points theism. But my thing is, that can actually kind of backfire. Because if you also contend that God is the creator of the natural order, and that God gives things natures to direct them towards their end, then you seem to have a weird result here where you're saying that the process that God created to bring about creatures like us was not targeting a moral community. So I would say that's not expected under theism. So really, that's the big concern I have there, is basically when you try to torpedo the naturalistic explanation, you can also come to some weird conclusions about what God might do.
Yeah. Well, all right. I guess we're just going down this road for a minute, but we'll try to make it a little bit
We can pull
different
the
than
brakes. We can pull the
the
brakes.
last.
It is
Just real
early.
quick. So the comment that I saw was trying to argue against objective morality by saying, well, look, you think that morality is grounded in God, but God is a subject. So therefore, morality is subjective. And I think that this is like a very confused statement, but it can be at least helpful to sort of articulate what the tradition. So maybe this is rather than run a moral argument, this can just be helpful to articulate what the traditional view of morality is. And then people can kind of figure out how that might either help support or develop moral arguments, or maybe it doesn't, right? So the traditional view of morality in relation to God is just, it's not independent of a lot of other, call them metaphysical theses, really important, like structures of the world that classical philosophers held to. So, for example, real essentialism, that things have essences, right? This is a pretty big one, because to say morality is subjective in the way that a moral anti-realist would is to say that like morality is contingent upon our fancies, our whims, our preferences, and our desires, right? So something is good just insofar as I desire it. That's all it means. It's sort of reporting a sort of psychological stance, if you will, called stance dependent. When people say that morality is objective, they're really saying that your preferences can be misguided, right? That there's something else that grounds morality, where your opinions about some things can actually be wrong, right? Just because you feel a certain way towards something doesn't mean that something is right. And I would argue, certainly, that I think this is the common sense view of morality. Most people think that, like, hey, just because you feel like, running a genocide campaign doesn't make that good and right, right? All right, so if you're a traditional, classical, perennial, unreconstructed, unrepentant philosopher, right? You're going to say that the world is sort of structured in a way that the primary thing in the world are substances, things with real essences directed towards particular effects or ranges of effects or ends, a telos, right? And it's just going to be the case that these things have natural necessities, right? There's certain necessary truths about them, like human beings are our essence, humanity. We are rational animals, and it's just a sort of necessary truth that we are perfected as the kind of thing we are by certain attainments or goods, like knowledge, right? It's just a necessary truth that knowledge is perfective of us. And it doesn't matter whether we desire knowledge, right? It's just always going to be, in fact, even if you desire to be ignorant, that would be really bad for you. Even if you prefer to be ignorant, it isn't going to change the case that knowledge actually is good for you. It perfects you as the kind of thing that you are. Now, somebody might object to this, commitment or whatever, but that's beside the point. I would just like to show like how it is that the classical theistic framework gives a basis for moral objectivity, and then how it links up to God, right? So if you think that that's the case, and then you also hold to other principles like the convertibility thesis, right? That all goodness is just being under the aspect of perfection or desirability, then all these things are going to sort of link up in a really interesting and I think fruitful way to give us both a meta-ethical theory where what God is God just is Plato's good, just as a being of pure actuality. He is pure goodness under the convertibility thesis. But God is also the necessary condition of there being any sort of world of natures at all, right? And then morality just kind of follows from the natural law, which are just laws of the natures of things, right? Which even God can't change because they're necessary truths. He can decide whether he puts a certain nature into existence, but if he puts a human nature into existence, it's just going to be the case that there are some things that are necessarily perfective of that nature and some things that aren't, right? So yes, so in like a roundabout way, I think God is the ultimate foundation of morality as the supreme good itself and as the sort of necessary condition for there to be a realm of existing natures and for there to be a natural law. But God is emergent from, if you will, or sort of necessitated from this sort of broader metaphysical picture of the world, right? And the problem with a lot of contemporary debates is like they're just like thinking about whether you should include or exclude this entity that is conceived of as invisible, immaterial, and very powerful, but their general metaphysics is either completely vacuous or it's already assuming like a world picture that is reductivist, nominalistic, right? That is just entirely not how, somebody like Aquinas would have seen the world. So it makes these debates in many ways just almost entirely pointless. Maybe that's a bit exaggerated, but often very fruitless. So maybe that's different than how we've talked about the moral argument before.
Yeah, I feel like we've hit some of those things. I think that there's just like a tension. If you are a materialist, for example, you're like hardcore naturalist of some type, saying that you have these like moral seemings, you can try to kind of figure out a bucket to put that in, but there's going to be at least like a feeling of tension there. And I think that's what a lot of people are interested in the moral argument because of. There are a lot of people who say, well, I believe in God, but they don't actually have any metaphysical picture to speak of. They've just kind of inherited a bland materialism from watching Bill Nye the Science Guy in third grade.
Yeah.
So they feel like, wow, okay, that really helps with the whole God thing that I want to hold in my mind. And it doesn't match with the type of materialism. Boom, we got to have something in between.
Yeah, but the problem there is like, if you don't have that, like you still have to give a good reason of why like bringing God into the picture now secures your robust conception of morality. And what I want to say there is like, man, unless you are like a classical theist with these commitments I'm talking about, like it kind of gets hard to cash that out, man.
Yeah.
Without like landing on like one of the horns of Euthyphro, where you end up in this sort of like extreme divine voluntarism, where it is kind of a moral anti-realism at this point, where something is good just because God fancied it, right? And that's not the classical position, right? Aquinas sternly rejects voluntarism. He thinks the divine nature as the good itself entails certain rather robust moral consequences, right? So I think you kind of need to do the metaphysics at some point, no matter what, if you're going to ultimately like run your moral project. I just think it's I don't know. Yeah, so I guess I'm with you. If that gets people like into that door,
gets people interested.
Yeah, I think that's.
And
I
then
think
we can teach them.
Yeah.
Hey, there's things called essences. Hey, they have objective means of flourishing. Hey, the way that happens is they're perfected. Hey, the way something gets perfected is when it gets something called the good to fill out, finish, or perfect a given form. The maximum and cause of this whole entire genius is blam, God. Finally simple, ka-cha.
Yeah, throw the fourth way in there.
People.
Yeah. I
Here's
think it can be.
Here's a practical question. Are
Sure.
you ready for this?
How do I trim my beard?
You don't. We have video now, man.
Right.
That would take me that would have taken me my entire life to grow, for sure. Yeah. The hair on top of my head is like unbelievably thick. It can turn into like a helmet.
It's a good problem to have, man. I got that too. Very thick hair, yeah.
Down below, I don't know, the beard would be patchy, gross. You just look creepy if you can't grow a good beard, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here's my practical question on beard related. You know what I've noticed? I sound like an old man now.
Mm-hmm.
All these people, lots of Catholic influencers and people all over the net are really pushing like carnivore diet, going against the ultra processed foods and whatnot.
Yeah.
And at first I actually thought about doing an episode on this. And then I thought, no, I cover philosophy, theology, and economics. This is a weird digression that seemingly
Let's talk
everybody is
about the
taking.
moral argument and carnivore diet. Let's go, baby.
Right. So here's
Yeah.
where I'm going with this. Then I thought a little bit more. Philosophy and medicine has always been heavily intertwined. We have Galen. Later on, we have Avicenna. And it was viewed as a type of philosophy, or at least philosophy adjacent, because what it's dealing with is an issue of justice. Is
Mhm.
justice inside of the body amongst its parts?
Yep.
And how do we reach this type of justice is the question of medicine, which seems to be a question of philosophy also. Thus,
Mhm.
we get
Mhm.
a ridiculous amount of crossover throughout the ages. So we do kind of have a question about an internal justice. We have a question of justice vis-a-vis us and the world of food, the supermarket shelves.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
totally.
it is kind of in the realm of philosophy. And what I want to pick out are the moral assumptions that seem to be driving this. And I'll just do one
Sure.
and
This is
see
interesting.
if you can kick in a couple, and we can
Yeah.
jam on it, brainstorm, solve the
Mhm.
problem, and give a great gift to humanity.
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right, so the one that I've noticed is this idea that things that are natural are better than things which have been transformed by human work.
Sure. Right. Like
That seems
don't
to
eat
be
styrofoam. Yeah.
like, it is like, well, hang on, backtrack to the Garden of Eden. And
Yeah.
that seems to be entirely false, right? Like the one thing we know that they just like grabbed and they
Yeah.
got like went kind of wrong, but then they're told, "Hey, take dominion over the whole earth, subdue it."
All
Like
right.
you're actually meant to have charge of this to transform the language of to till and to work. The
Yep.
same language which is used later in the temple and the tabernacle. There's this
Yeah.
type of transformative labor which was always the plan to be directed at nature, to be shared in community.
Yeah.
And yet, we have people who have a knee-jerk reaction against the things that we've added labor to,
Yes.
and this preferential option
Yeah.
for the natural. Why is it that?
Yeah. Well, why is it? That's an interesting question, but I think I could say a few things. First off, you're right. This is actually sometimes an objection against natural law theory, right? It's like, oh, you're a natural law theorist. Haha, idiot. Look at you wearing glasses.
Look at you complaining about poison ivy.
Gotcha, right? And of course, that's a complete straw man, right? The natural law theorist thinks that we follow the dictates of our nature. It says nothing about like only eat or use things that like grow from trees, right? That's
Sure.
completely irrelevant, right? It is of my nature to be able to see, right? So glasses restore a proper functioning and power that I'm supposed to have. So this is good for me to wear glasses, right? It's totally good.
So is it in our nature to eat Doritos? That's really the question.
Yeah. So all right, nutrition, like some of these things are like, they're not like you can just know them a priori. Like sometimes we gotta like get some empirical data and find out, like, is this something that in the long term is going to contribute to my health? Is it something that is in the long term going to be more detrimental? I mean, some of those are genuinely scientific questions, right?
So
And we
you
don't
have a
know.
foot in the fitness realm, maybe even 2 feet, maybe even 2 feet in a kettlebell.
Yes.
What's your stance on this? What do you think?
Yeah. So, like specifically, like the carnivore diet,
Sure. Carnivore diet.
All right.
Why
So
it works, if it works.
yeah,
Is
all right.
ultra processed food evil? If so, why?
I think it's less evil than starving to death, right? And in a lot of time, a lot of times it's the dose that makes the poison, right? So here are my thoughts on nutrition. First off, a lot of diets, and this is, I think, pretty well supported scientifically, come out in a wash when you equate for calories, right?
Right.
So what you find in terms of like weight loss and health improvements is like if you're eating low carb or high carb or Mediterranean or paleo or Atkins or whatever, like as long as you like equate calories, like it kind of doesn't really matter that much.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it kind of doesn't matter because the story isn't that clean or that simple. Why? Because it's clear that some foods do affect people in unique and different ways, and some nutrition profiles affect people in unique and different ways. Now, I'll give you an example. The ketogenic diet is proven to be a highly effective treatment for epilepsy,
Oh
right?
yeah, since the 70s, like
Earlier than that, and
I mean,
it's still used. So
long time.
so
70s are
clearly,
forever ago.
yeah, still used, and so that's really interesting, because this is like if you're talking about health and proper functioning, here's an instance where having a very specific type of diet, not just a calorie number,
Mm-hmm.
can seriously improve somebody's life,
Well,
right?
yes, I mean, yes, but I mean, I think a lot of people grab the ketos. I feel like dying down a little bit. I knew a guy who was a keto evangelist.
Carnivore seems to be the new keto
It
at the moment,
is, it
right?
is,
So here's all right. So let me
and
continue, and then
you're trying to actually tone down the level of overactivity in parts of the brain, which can cause a seizure. And your brain thrives mainly on glucose.
and
So
you're
if you
switching to
just cut out its
ketones, right?
one of
Yeah,
its
right.
key energy stores and you
Yeah,
regulate it down a little bit, sure. But that doesn't really tell us about overall health for somebody who
it
doesn't have
just
a brain
right.
injury
It just shows
problem.
that there can be a particular dietary method for people
Hmm.
that have a particular dysfunction or disorder, and so that ties into the carnivore thing, because the carnivore thing I think would be classified as a broad elimination style diet, right?
Hmm.
And the idea of an elimination diet, the general idea of an elimination diet is like, hey, there's something going on. Maybe we're not entirely sure what it is, where your body is reacting poorly to the types of things you're eating, not just the amount, but the types of things that you're eating. And I think that it's undeniably true that this can be the case for a lot of people. I know that there are certain types of things that, like, if I eat them, man, my joints just start to hurt, and so on and so forth, right?
Do you think this is more common? Do you think this has become more common in the last couple
It
decades?
seems to me that it has been,
I think
um,
so too, but I'm not sure if it actually became common or if everybody was
or if
just
it's
told to self-reflect upon
better
this.
reported, and
And
like
then I have one more theory. I know I kind of jumped in there.
yeah,
And this is completely unfounded. I have looked for data, and it's surprisingly hard to find data on things, especially like the instance of food allergies by year. It's just tough
yeah,
to
yeah,
find.
it
But what
is,
I theorize is what's going on with food allergies, what's going on with the massive uptick of autoimmune and autoimmune related things,
yeah,
the problems which seem to come from inflammation. It's basically that your body is turning in on itself and having some type of reaction. It's
hmm,
identified an antigen of some type that could be a milk protein, it could be something
yeah,
else. And then the immune system, which encompasses all sorts of things, including inflammation, overreacts in a way which is detrimental to your overall health. Here's my wild harebrained scheme. All right. To me, this is just a correlation, but I think there is some reason to believe that we would have causation. Um, I think it's smoking. So I see the decline of smoking, and then
hmm,
we have this rise of people having all these problems with overactive immune systems.
yeah,
And we know that what was in smoke was a series of highly reactive compounds which your body had to deal with. It's something that is quite irritating to the entire body.
yeah.
And I remember we're similar age. Like you remember going into like an Applebee's when you were a kid?
Dude, yeah,
There's
forget
just
that.
like
It's called my living room, man. My parents were chimneys, dude. Like,
see,
so like I could be a data point for you.
there you go. So it's like, all right, well, your
Should be
body had
laughing about that.
something.
It's deeply unfortunate, but it was what it was. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so our bodies had something to constantly fight rail against that was a real, actual toxic substance,
Hmm.
and that's pretty much gone. So it could be one of a couple things. One is, if we looked even before the prevalence of smoking, we would find a situation similar to today, but since everybody was eating just like a potato, well, nobody really noticed. The other option is this was more than one generation going along, and it could be like a epigenetic
I was gonna say maybe
reaction
there's an epigenetic component to it. Sure,
where
yeah.
basically it says, "Hey, watch out! the world is full of toxic stuff because you're literally in it from the time you are a
Yeah.
baby. If you grew up in the world of smoking, and then your offspring could have overreactive,
Yeah.
reactions to such things, but we don't actually have the thing which it's meant to target.
Yeah.
That's my
Yeah.
harebrained scheme.
Yeah. So like way above my pay grade, all this stuff at this
And
point.
mine. This stops
But
you, but it doesn't stop me from just coming up with wild theories.
this is
Just
the
teaching
great,
you, Pat.
this is where we're allowed to make fools of ourselves, right? So
Indeed. If was the internet created for anything else?
yeah, so I mean, like, I think there's a lot of people who ventured these ideas of, okay, well, clearly, like, something has been compromising us. Maybe it's not one thing, maybe it's many things, and right, and this is why we tend to. It seems like this is an issue that is maybe somewhat novel. Maybe it isn't. All I was going to say is that elimination diets are, and they come in various forms. Carnivore is just one of them. Meant to be a sort of thing where you can kind of maybe hit the reset button, and eventually you're supposed to kind of reintroduce foods and maybe kind of figure out like what works for you, what doesn't, so you can avoid nasty issues like these inflammatory issues or stuff like that. There's other ones, and like maybe that's it. Like maybe you just learn like, oh, I can have sweet potatoes, but I can't have anything in the nightshade family or whatever, and that's just the rest of my life for whatever reason. Others are like the GAPS diet, the gut and psychology protocol, is something that like is meant to like actually supposed to because some people link it to gut issues, and that might be connected to the other things, right? And they're supposed to like heal certain gut issues, and it is a restrictive elimination type of diet, but the idea is if you tough it out for long enough, then maybe it will resolve some of these issues long term. And there is a lot of interesting thought that's happening, and I think it's good thought, between the link between gut health and mental health and stuff like that. There's a lot of underexplored area and under researched area. And again, I think these are out of my pay grade because these aren't things that I can tell you from the armchair as a philosopher, right? These are hard empirical questions, right? I think they deserve attention for sure. I think there's a lot of weird health issues going on right now. So what I want to say is like, okay, for a lot of things, for practical advice for people, hey, don't like think that any one diet is like the magic pill for weight loss. Calories are really important. At the same time, sorry to keep going on forever because this is a nuanced conversation. Like when you just shout calories in, calories out to people, that isn't very helpful either, because a lot of things can affect either side of that equation, including like certain medications you might be on or other environmental factors, right? So like, it's not as simple as it sounds. So that needs to be understood. But yes, calories do matter, and that equation does matter. But at the same time, the types of things that you eat also seem to matter significantly. I think it's worth paying attention to. I do not eat a lot of hyper processed, hyper palatable foods because I used to when I was younger, and I was a chunky little beast and very unhealthy, right? So I decided I didn't want to be that way anymore. And so I started trying to figure this stuff out. So the truth is that, yeah, I do eat a lot of things that are natural, as in like minimally processed, but I still eat a fair amount of processed stuff. I have like protein powders, so it's all processed, right? And I think that is contributing to my goal of being healthy and maintaining a good weight and stuff like that. So like, I'm not, if something like isn't natural, it's not like I'm going to avoid it like crazy. I think it's like, as a good general rule, yeah, a diet that is high in protein, relatively unprocessed, stuff like fruits and vegetables and nuts and avocados and stuff like that it's kind of hard to get like super fat and unhealthy if you focus on mostly that stuff, right?
I think it's a decent heuristic, but I think people can take it past being a heuristic to being like a scientific stance one could take. As far as protein, I wish I could, man, if I had the technological skills, I know there's a way to make graphs and things show up. There was somebody who looked at the blend of like what we're eating nationally and found the percentage of protein by year. And back in like the 60s, 70s, it was about 13.5% protein that we were getting from our overall blend of food. And then today it's like 11, maybe 11.5%. So it's declined. You think,
Sure.
well, it's not a big deal. But it tends to be that people eat and feel full when they've hit what their body thinks is approximating the amount of protein they need.
Yeah.
So if you say, well, if I have to eat that blend of food instead of the other blend of food, how many more calories will I end up eating? It turns out
Yes.
you'll add about 20% more calories to your diet if you've dropped it down to an 11.5% overall protein amount.
Yeah.
So that explains to me a lot of the obesity stuff. And I think ultra processed and whatnot is typically just it's a heuristic which seems to be targeting low protein, not very satiating foods.
If it's got the slogan, "You can't eat just one," that's kind of what we're talking about, right?
But if you eat a triple Whopper at Burger King,
That's a good amount of
as
protein
I
in that,
do
dude.
quite
Right?
often,
Yeah. That is a protein packed meal right there, my friend.
it is
Unfortunately, yeah, there's a lot of other stuff there.
85 grams of protein and about 1,100 calories.
Yeah. So
you can lose weight on that.
You are correct. Yeah, I did say that, by and large, diets come out in the wash if you equate calories, but it is true that there are certain things that are difference makers. Maybe not like this will solve everything, but protein is one of those. We do find that if you push protein up, good things start to happen. Like what you're talking about. People feel more satiated. Protein also has a higher thermic effect, right? So I often tell people from just a pure practical standpoint, like, hey, if you just like not to get overwhelmed, don't do a million things at once, just start pushing protein up. And here's a good practical guideline. The traditional bro guideline is eat a gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. That's a lot of protein for a lot of people, especially if you're a bigger boy. So I recommend, and this isn't like original to me, a gram of protein per pound of desired body weight per day.
Yeah, I
So
think
like
that's good.
whatever you want to weigh. Like say you're 720 pounds, right?
Sure.
That's a lot of protein. But
you can't see below here, so
but you
yeah, that might be.
but you want to weigh 160 pounds. Being a little bit ridiculous. But yeah, just whatever you want to weigh. Just try and target somewhere in that general neighborhood of protein per day. And yeah, try and get it from, most like not triple Whoppers, right? Try and get it from
triple
like
Whoppers are good, man.
try and get it, from your chicken breast and your salmon and your turkey and stuff like that, right? Or a protein shake, right? Yeah.
I have a super simple rule which generally works, and that is if I eat 3,000 calories a day, I'll drop weight. My maintenance is probably closer to 4, maybe.
Yeah.
So
Because you're active
to
and you
hit my
lift a
protein
lot, so
targets,
yeah, you've got a good amount of output, right? Yeah.
yeah, so I just look for foods which have a grams of protein to number of calories ratio of better than 15:1. Because that means that if I hit a 200-gram protein day, which I can pretty reliably do,
Yeah.
that means I hit 3,000 calories.
Right.
So if I keep all the foods I eat averaging below that 1 to 15, and that means when you just look at like a food label, you can be like that divided by that, boom, real easy. And it's a decent heuristic.
Yeah. I think for most people, most of the time, simple rules are good to have, right? Because as I'm sure you've seen, Jake, it is very easy for people to get into nutritional cults, right?
Yeah.
and
another...
have some like very, I think, detrimental, obsessive sorts of tendencies that are not entirely desirable, right?
And people cling to the rules like crazy. It's almost like in almost every religion, you have some version of clean and unclean.
Indeed.
And there's always dietary restrictions.
It's called like eating clean is a term, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, I know that we have not yet talked about health and things like that, but I do think that it is philosophical in the sense that it kind of fits within the philosophy of religion at this point. If what we're trying to do is flourish as human beings by determining what is clean and unclean.
Yeah, that is for sure. We're rational animals. We're animals, man. We got bodies, right? There's a definite flourishing aspect to that side of the equation. And there's, of course, many opportunities for virtue in the kitchen and the gym, right? Fortitude, temperance, right? These are really important aspects of human flourishing. And yeah, gluttony, right? That's one of the big ones, right?
And Another one is, I know this is man screams at sky at this point, but
Do it.
I'm going to do it. So one of the prophets, I think it's Jeremiah, makes the point more than once that don't call evil good or good evil. And he says it in a variety of ways. Woe to he who calls black white and white black. Like this is not good. Like, don't confuse these categories.
Yep.
And the more I've noticed that, like, how this runs amok in society, the more I think one's actually, if anything, worse than the other, and it's not what people think. If you call something evil good, that's a problem. And depending on the evil, that could be a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
But when you call something good evil, that is like skipping on the raggedy edge of blasphemy because of what we talked kind of at the intro, that God is the cause of all goodness. So if we're going to take a good thing and go, that's evil, then, ooh, that's an affront to God. If we find a little piece of non-being in the world and go, that seems fine, bad, I'm not sure that's as bad. So I think heuristic-wise, moral heuristic-wise, we should probably assume things are okay and good prior to assuming they're evil. Not in all cases, and boy, is that a rule of thumb kind of statement, but I see this amongst people who make like so-called Catholic economic rules and commentary. They're like, oh, this is bad. Oh, this is bad. That's usury. This is usury. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You do know, to say that these people are, say, being usurious, that could be detraction, slander. This is a very, very serious sin. You got to be darn sure about what you're talking about.
Yeah, right.
And I think at the same time, we're not necessarily slandering the, I don't know, soy lecithin that's emulsifying our protein powder when we say it's bad or good or whatever. But I do think we do need to be careful that we go, oh, it has chemicals, it's bad. It's like,
yeah,
don't
well,
call
I mean, like,
good things evil. We got to be a little bit more careful about this.
Yeah,
I'd like to see what we're talking about. In what dose are we talking about?
Yeah, what doesn't
As part
have
of which
chemicals?
diet?
Pretty sure I've got chemicals.
I'm not going to call the triple whopper bad.
Yeah. Well, look, man. Again, like dose poison, right? I think there's a very healthy, balance to be struck there. Can somebody have a triple whopper and it be good for them? Of course, there's a context like that. Am I getting a little bit concerned, like if their diet is entirely comprised of like 5 of these a day? Okay.
They're hitting the protein target.
All right. You're getting the protein targets, man.
Oh yeah.
But hey, look, 5 of those a day. Here's where context and situations and intention, like these all go into moral considerations. This person might be a professional athlete, right? And they might just need a lot of calories. So what might be gluttonous and bad for one person might be like just barely making the needs of what another person actually requires for that day, right? So you're definitely right. We can't say like this triple whopper is bad, or even 5 of them. Or like, okay, maybe getting closer to like certain concern, but there's a lot more that needs to be specified before we can make that judgment with any degree of moral confidence, to be sure, right?
Do you think that we should find people who fancy themselves epistemologists and get them on more practical things? Because I feel like oftentimes where you hear, oh, I study epistemology, it's like you are delving into the most ridiculous head in the clouds type of things, when what we really need are people who are epistemologists, but that's because they also understand, say, statistics or how to design a study or what type of fallacies and problems we could have when we actually investigate individual things. I feel like that would be a little bit more useful, practical, and I think it belongs under the camp of philosophy to say, well, I don't think nutritional studies are terribly accurate because they typically select for people with a broad range of properties which aren't under consideration.
Yeah, I mean, that's in that hopefully is like the job of the philosopher of science, right? I heard a philosopher say the other day, and it's kind of an arrogant thing to say, but I don't think he was completely incorrect. He's like, I'm summarizing this loosely. Something like, when I talk with scientists, they often just seem confused, right? Now, when they talk with me, they probably think I'm ignorant. But the difference is there's a difference between being confused and being ignorant, right? So right, and I think this sort of makes sense. And again, it sounds very arrogant, but like the philosopher's job is just to like not be confused, right? We can be ignorant about a lot of things. But like at the very least, we just never want to be confused, right? Whereas like science is true, man. Like if you're just a specialist and you're not trained in philosophy, you're not thinking philosophically, you might not be ignorant. You might know a whole lot about your special little area that I'm completely ignorant of. But you could also be laboring under a lot of just very basic conceptual confusions, right? About a great many things that do factor into the types of conclusions that you're making from your specialty, right? So I think that relates to your point is like, yeah, I think this is why like philosophy of science and stuff like that is really important, because philosophy is just trying to think well about things. It's thinking hard about things, and it's usually best done slow, right? It's about trying to bring, especially philosophy of science, it's about trying to bring conceptual clarity to the various sciences. So I think I think there are people doing that, of course. I also tend to have that similar sentiment because I'll watch like somebody build like this incredible, like beautiful, majestic, virtuosic level in like Super Mario Maker and then like beat it. And like, why didn't you just try to cure cancer, right? With that amount of effort, right? Like, that's like the most amazing thing I've ever seen and the most useless activity known to man, right? It's like,
but there is a lot.
But I guess that's teach, abilities and interests, I guess, right?
I was reading this site. I think it popped up on like Facebook or something. The whole pitch was, we've been thinking really hard about how to make the world a better place, and they had some ideas like, listen, it doesn't necessarily mean you go and become some type of charity worker, because sometimes charity doesn't do all that much good. And it could be that instead of taking a job and making $50K at a charity, running a charity or something, well, you could go and make $250K as a software engineer, then hire 4 such people to run 4 charities and then live at the same wages, and you've multiplied your good. And it's kind of going through this stuff. But you could tell that they kind of had a few anti-market biases where they're like, now, we're not saying that necessarily, always people who are making a lot of money or running large businesses are actually even doing much good. And I'm like, really? That's fascinating. It's like, in such a ridiculously densely interconnected economy and world, I think that's a really hard one to even know.
Yes,
I mean, there's that charity over there who's having somebody fill out a form so that they can know if they can, I don't know, care for them in some way. And there's a paper company over there making forms for very, very low prices. It's like, that's actually contributing to the charity. And so is the power company and the landlord who was able to expand the supply of places where you could even run your charity in that area. And the list goes on and on. And then we could even say there's utility to people who just plain old make people happy. Yeah, yes, the person who created the Super Mario Brothers whatever has brought a lot of joy to a lot of people.
Certainly, we're big Nintendo fans here, man.
Right? Like, this is good. There's a proper role of leisure. Like anything, it could be abused. But overall, I think it's very easy to jump to, oh, well, certain things are entirely useless or not helpful or whatever.
Yep. Yes, that is right. That is right. Now, at the same time, again, like the Whopper situation, there is a clear point where, okay, there's a vice at play, right? There's sloth, there's gluttony or whatever. But again, you need a certain context, right, before you can start to make those sorts of judgments, right? Yeah.
I challenged somebody at one point, and I think I hurt their feelings, but whatever. Try to be nice most of the time. There was somebody crazy into like the organic this and that. They were just very scrupulous in what they purchased.
Yeah.
And I classify that as a type of gluttony, where you're not looking for a maximum quantity, but you're looking for a maximum quantity. That's a form of gluttony. In fact, I think even Aquinas says that one who prefers the most delicate of things,
quality,
is the form
right?
of gluttony.
Yeah, if you're like a super picky and like ungrateful person, the angelic doctor has got some words for you, for sure.
My challenge was, okay, over Lent, here's what I want you to do. You're going to go get that grass-fed steak? No, get the cheapest one.
Yep.
All right, now you're
Get
going to
that
go and get your
corn-fed steroid cow. Char
delicious.
it to a crisp with the lighter fluid.
Yep. And I'm like, you know it. I'm like, everything that's on your regular shopping list, you probably know roughly how much you're spending. I want you to spend that entirely on the most regular, cheap, perfectly nothing special version
Baloney.
of the food. Take the difference and give it to somebody who's actually struggling with, like, getting any food. So send it to, say, a mission parish in Haiti to feed people in the
Yeah.
inner city in the wake of like one of their many bazillion earthquakes, or send it to some poor town in Africa which is struggling from some famine or something.
Right.
Like, but what? And the response immediately, of course, was, right, but it's not going to be good for my health. It's like, yeah, I know. Sounds incredibly virtuous to me. Like, you're taking a little bit of your health, at the best, most charitable interpretation of what these foods do. And
Right.
you're saying, I'm just going to drop off just a little bit about how I feel, a little bit of my health, a little bit of maybe my longevity, to expand that out and give a massive amount of health
Yep.
and longevity to somebody else. I think that sounds
And I think you're right,
great.
man. And let's talk about spiritual health, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about spiritual health. I think that's right. And I can tell you, being in the fitness circles, man, that's a challenge that I think could do a lot of good for a lot of people. But I think it would be extremely challenging for a lot of people to actually go through with that. And this is what I was talking about before. There's a sort of obsessive and truly unhealthy, not just like
Mhm.
spiritually, but I think psychologically, attachment people have to certain modes of eating.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
why I've been yelling at the sky about it a little bit, because I'm like, there's something that's just not quite right about this trend. Like, I don't care if people eat a ton of meat. I do think that it's probably because they were deficient in protein before. They're certainly not later. Ergo, they feel better. Or
Yeah,
they've
like,
substituted
yeah,
certain things out.
I don't want to deny, like, I know people that have like hugely benefited from
Hmm.
elimination style diets. Like, I mean, like people who were like almost completely like cripples in various ways. And then like they run some sort of elimination style diet. They go paleo or carnivore or keto, and like it really does help them. And of course, like that's cool. That's awesome.
Yep.
I just always like to temper it by saying, well, all right, let's just realize that like just because carnivore did great for you, I'm not denying that. That doesn't mean it's going to do great for your neighbor Jane. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, right? But the problem
Hmm.
is that in these circles, you tend to see these very quick generalizations, right? They're like, whatever worked for me is now what I must proclaim as the gospel for everybody else. That's hasty
Right.
for sure. And I think can even be a bit dangerous in some instances. So why I wouldn't downplay the utility that some people get from all this. Again, I think there's a reasonable context where it's like, okay, we don't know exactly what it is yet, right? Of why it is that these types of approaches do work for some people and not for others. But at the same time, we shouldn't deny that they do work for some people. I mean, there's some people out there who are just like adamant, like these things are all crap. It's a waste of time, blah, blah, blah. That's not true, man. Like that's clearly not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I don't think that's true.
yeah,
I know some people who have had
clearly
big
these things
effects.
have worked like
Hmm.
like a miracle legit for some people, right?
Hmm.
But at the same time, there's lots and lots and lots of other people where they do not experience that at the same time, right?
Well, and I really want to put my finger on the why. I just don't think it's helpful to ever really have false beliefs. Nobody has done terribly much better in their overall flourishing in that. I'm like, I know it seems to be a small issue, but it's like, I'd like to know the why behind it. And I really do suspect that when I see people go on carnivore, it's really tough to overeat if you're only eating meat, and you probably are starting to get sick of it. So we already know that if you drop a fair amount of weight, and that weight is primarily fat,
Yep.
then that can do things like balance your hormones out, because a lot of those hormones are
Yeah, like
regulated
just like
based on your
comes to
adipose
calorie
tissue.
and weight loss side of it, right? And this is, I mean,
Hmm.
like we have, I don't know if there's one on carnivore, but like we have this on fasting. Like there's been, good controlled trials to show that, like, okay, fasting is cool. It does help people lose weight, but when you control for, and like, it does improve, certain biomarkers, but when you control for calories, it seems like you get the same results. Just
Right.
right.
Yeah.
If you're not fasting. So, that, like, these are empirical questions. They're opportunities for research. And my guess is, that yes, a good amount of a lot of the reason that people feel better on these, especially the weight loss side, is
Mm-hmm.
because just huge chunks of calories are coming out of their diet automatically. But I'm guessing there's some other element, for reasons totally unknown to me, right, related to allergies or food sensitivity, that is also a factor in that are not universal, but are just, for this particular person, it really helped and it really worked, at least for a particular time. Right? That's the other thing with these sort of elimination type of diets is, they might, work for a particular amount of time, but they might be the sort of thing that, is not particularly sustainable for a variety of other reasons as well, right? And to be
Yeah.
fair,
I'm
I
not.
don't think a lot of people who recommend this stuff generally recommend it as like a lifelong thing. I think they generally recommend it as like kind of like just a couple months to see if you can get some stuff sorted out. But I know there's a lot of people that, like, once they start down that carnivore keto road, they stay on it, so.
Yeah, I'm not against these things necessarily. And hey, if it works, it works. Maybe we could talk about why exactly it's working, or if there were some other paths. But if this is the one you gets you excited and it has positive effects, dandy. Um, but I have noticed that there's almost like a penitential kind of religious aspect to it. It just, especially since it's popping up amongst many religious figures, or it's kind of said with similar conviction. I wonder if it's in part just because it's hard to do some of these things. It requires large amounts of life changes, that because we live in such a comfortable, nice, friendly little
Yeah,
environment
yeah.
where all our needs
It's
are
kind of
met,
it's kind of like
people are
it's
looking for
kind of like
something
praying like the
penitential,
hypocrites
difficult.
for people, right? Like, they like to kind of show off about their, on Instagram, about their carnivore diet and whatnot.
I think it's exciting. People are bored.
Yeah,
That explains much of humanity, in my opinion, is people are bored.
yeah,
Like, I think maybe 50% of the reason anybody does most things are they're just bored.
yeah, yeah. So man, this is again way above my pay grade. I'm trying to figure out, well, what is the reasonable position here, and I think it's the one that I came in with, right? Is that I wouldn't discount the potential value of these types of diets for some people. At the same time, it's super hasty to think that you've discovered some sort of solution to everything for everyone at the same time. Uh, and that there is, like anything else, I think, if you're thinking in terms of virtue ethic, there are potentials for virtue or vice in how you approach this type of thing, right? So you think about, like, just going to the gym. Like, somebody can go to the gym because they want to develop fortitude and they want to get genuinely healthier and they want to be a good role model for their kids, and they can do the same things as somebody else who goes to the gym because they're a complete narcissist and they want to get
Mm-hmm.
the attention of some other lady at the gym and have an adulterous affair. And, like, okay, well, like, they're doing the same exercises, right? But one
Mm-hmm.
person is, like, clearly, like, or very much more likely growing in spiritual health and a life of virtue, whereas the other person is corrupting in various and pernicious ways, right? Mm-hmm.
You know, Circling back to the whole you flourish based on the type of being you are kind of thing, that there's a natural law case that one ought to pursue goods which allow you to flourish in that mode. That might be part of what I'm trying to put my finger on again and again. And that is, like, me, Pat, everybody else that's listening, you are an omnivore. And we do know this for a variety of reasons. Like, you can look at your teeth pattern, you can look at the overall length of your digestive tract. It is not the length of a cow's, right? It's not the length of even most apes. It's not the short length of something that eats primarily meat either.
Yeah.
It's kind of splitting the difference. So we also know we have certain things and enzymes and whatnot that allow us to digest some vegetable matter, but not all. For instance, somewhere after, I think it's like, what, 5 million years ago or something. They say it's tough to know, right? But after you branch off chimps, we lost the ability to take vegetable matter and then synthesize protein. So that's gone. and that shows that, all right, we had a decent amount of meat in our diet, but we retain other stuff that kind of puts us in the other way. So we actually do know our mode of flourishing if we look hard at what type of beings we are. We are omnivores. So it just seems anti-perfective to only seek to eat either a vegan diet, which I think is not a great idea, or a full-scale carnivore idea, which I think is better than being a vegan. But I don't think it's your ideal mode of flourishing. Now, maybe you have some type of bespoke problem, which means that if you tried to do anything other, then it's problematic. Maybe. But I would say most people should think hard about what a human being is and try to target that. We're
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
we share the same, um, we share the same nature.
Right. So don't try and feed a lion a bunch of
Kale,
vegetables. Yeah, kale. Right.
or anybody kale.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
Put
think
down the kale.
yeah, nutrition is complicated. I think I agree with that. And I think there are special cases, as there's obviously special cases where you might need to go in a particular direction to fix a particular issue. But yeah, I think right. I don't think most people most of the time can or should be eating a ketogenic diet, right?
Unless you're having seizures, at which point
Which is
keto
not
all
most
the way,
people
man.
most of the
Don't let us
time,
talk
right? Yeah,
NFL
which
in
is
here.
not, yeah.
Right. But I think people, like right now, most points in history, if you said, hey, who are you, Pat? You'd go, oh, I'm Pat, son of, I don't know, Pat
Door.
Sr. Yeah, of the land of this. Like, this is how you introduce yourself.
Yeah.
And now it's just like, oh, hi, I'm, Bob, I'm Gen Z, and I have a YouTube and an Instagram, and it's all about me. It's like, okay, this is a big shift.
Yeah.
We've gone from a little bit more of like a solidarity and a corporate identity. Who am
Yeah,
I? Well,
yeah.
let me tell you about my family. Let me tell you about my town. Let me tell you about my people.
Yeah.
To I really need to get on the table all of the things that make me distinctive.
Mhm.
And I think this cultural push goes into nutrition, which is like, what should I eat? Something that's going to make me really distinctive. That's just for me and not for you, and is certainly different and doesn't necessarily connect me into the rest of everything else. I want to be a special, as they say, snowflake.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting, I mean, food is such a communal thing, right? So it's interesting to
Mm-hmm.
see the sort of breaking down of that communal aspect with these
There
hyper
you go, Pat. Not
specialized
above your pay grade. Keep going.
restrictive diets. Oh, you push me, I'll give you answers, and then I'll get increasingly nervous the more you push me on them, right? Well, yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, this relates to the person who can't go out or even stay at home and enjoy a meal with their family because they just are so obsessive about what they eat. And I think I want to say that's generally a problem, right?
Yeah.
That's generally a
Yeah.
problem for sure, because we are not just rational animals, we're social rational
Mm-hmm.
animals, right? So there's something that's really harmed in us to the extent that we become so hyper individualistic, and certainly these crazes about food can promote that. Yes, good. That sounds right to me.
And it breaks, yeah. And if it's breaking down a community, that is a problem. And that shows that there's a problem upstream of that. If there's something that's breaking you off of these communal experiences, which you're meant to have as a person that you're doing, got to re-examine that habit. I mean, apparently there's been some, and I'm sorry I can't quote the study, but I'm told, fact check me on this one, that when people are told to repeatedly think about and consider the foods that they're eating and how they're digesting and how everything's going, there are objective markers of them getting worse at digesting, processing, and absorbing these things. It seems to be that you can actually, I mean, much has been said about the communication with the gut to the brain,
Yeah.
but this could be a situation where we have something going in the other direction, where
Yeah.
if we really are very concerned about this, it can actually cause a problem. At which
Yes.
point,
Yeah.
we're not dealing with an medical epidemic. We're dealing with a social epidemic of some type, where we're actually teaching people to think in a way which can
that brings
harm them
attention to
communally,
something, or even causes
personally.
the harm itself. Yeah. No, this is true. I think it's undeniably true. I'll give you an example. Fairly recent. Tinnitus. You familiar with tinnitus?
Yes.
Ringing in the ears, right?
Mhm.
So there's a guy. One of the theories of why a number of people have tinnitus is because of the Jamberoff cycle, right? And this is the idea that they notice something that we all have all the time, which is a certain degree of ringing in the ears, right? And it alarms them to an extent.
Mm.
And then they start to become hyper focused on it, and they develop hyper acuity because they're just teaching their brain that this is important. We need to pay attention to this. We need to pay attention to this. And so it becomes more pronounced. It becomes louder and louder and louder and louder, right? When really there's nothing wrong with their hearing, right? This is a controversial thesis, but I actually think it's true in at least some cases. And I can talk to personal experience about this actually. And right. So the idea there is that, I hate to say it's all in your head, but to an extent, a lot of it is in your head, right? Because what you've done is you've put a certain attention on something under a certain degree of stress, and you've told your body to be like alert to it, right? Like this is an issue. And so it becomes more pronounced and more pronounced. And then the more pronounced it becomes, the more anxious you get over it. And the more pronounced it becomes, and the cycle of doom. They call this a cycle of doom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Good
so,
name for
and
it.
so, what certain doctors who deal with this issue do is they just try to get people to break that cycle, right? To not
Mhm.
give it so much attention, because the theory is that there's a natural filtering that we all have where this sensation is happening, but we just naturally filter it out because we realize it's just not important, right? And so you kind of have to reset that through various, therapy techniques, if you will, or something like that, until it's just so background you don't even notice it anymore, right? I think that is a definite true phenomena, whether you want to go all the way with that, with tinnitus, or maybe it's just some cases of tinnitus. I think it's a definitely true phenomena that is true with a wide range of different issues. I mean, that just seems to be the case, like with various certain anxiety issues and stuff like that. And it would certainly seem to link with the thing that you've just talked about, right? Where there's a certain attention that is given to something that is kind of seen as a problem that itself
Mhm.
could either just exacerbate it or what have you. And then the kind of more you feed into it, the worse it gets with a certain respect, right? I don't know. We're allowed to.
Maybe. Yeah.
We're just allowed to speculate here, right? It's worth
And
it. Look. I'm not like saying like get off your meds or whatever, right? But I'm saying it's worth
Mhm.
thinking about, right? It's worth
Mhm.
thinking about. That's it, right? Mm-hmm.
I think as far as just thinking about things, we're told in scripture, dwell on things which are good, which are lovely, which are true, etc. I think that's very practical advice. And if we have like a focus on gratitude and humility, that's going to change the way that we look at food and everything else. I often hear like almost like an anger among some people. Like, I can't believe that they're putting antibiotics in milk. Why would they do that? It's just like, well, first, you don't know why that would happen. Second, you don't know what on earth it takes to run a dairy farm. Next up, you're not grateful for the milk you have. And finally, my wife actually worked for the state in the lab which tested milk, and no, it doesn't have antibiotics. That's immediately that's tested for and is kicked out, and it doesn't have that. And it's just that the more expensive ones advertise it, but all of them are free of that by law. So what you've actually done is you've directed your anger and rage at something which truly does not exist.
Yeah.
And you put these ideas that these farmers, these people who are actually legitimately, literally feeding you, are somehow evil or wrong or foolish or
It's
stupid.
running some sort of experiment on you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you can't possibly know that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing, if a scientist comes and says, okay, well, there's a desiccant that goes on wheat. We've actually done some tests on some generations of rats. It's replicated in some ape trials, and we can show that the average amount of this desiccant does cause these damage in these pathways, and we've done it. Okay, cool. I'll listen. It's fun. But if we're not actually privy to that information, I think it does borderline on slander or detraction or something if we just assume that. And it really torpedoes our ability to be grateful for the work of others,
Yeah,
which kind of
it could
circles
just
back to
send
this
you
whole,
off into endless
yeah,
chases too.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it means that we're like what I seemingly coming back to is this denigration of the value of human labor, where we're reflexively taught now to say ultra processed food is bad. And listen, if all you're eating is Cheetos off your stomach while watching Netflix, don't do that. But the idea that ultra processed equals bad, or that a long list of ingredients, which I'm not privy to what they are, is de facto bad. I think you can use this as a heuristic to target something which is true, but you can't take that heuristic as something which is necessarily true in
Yep.
itself.
Yeah.
Because that would be, I think, assuming something that you truly don't know, which is an act of pride. Instead, I think we gotta sit back a little bit, be a little bit more humble, and say
Yeah.
good things and bad things God hands us,
Yep.
and we should accept them both. We should accept the cheap milk,
Yeah.
and maybe accept that there are some things in modern society, the way that things are organized, that aren't good. And you know what? God gives us all of these things. We should be responsible, practical, prudent, but at the end of the day, we don't really have to get so worked up, you know?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, I think that's all right. And like if you're gonna tell me that ultra processed food is bad, then I want a good story, for why that is. And I think you can give like here I can give a good story. Like Doritos are bad. Okay. Well, why? Well, if somebody's like starving, like I want them to have Doritos, so they can't just be like bad, full stop, right? That would be good. It would be
Mm-hmm.
good for that person to have that food for sure, right? I think what people should say is okay, certain very processed foods are what nutritionists call hyper palatable foods, and these are
Mm-hmm.
foods that have a very low satiety index, not like a super dense nutrient profile, and just are just very easy to overconsume.
They're tasty.
They're tasty and not very
Really tasty
filling,
food.
right? and
Uh-huh.
and
Sure.
and in the long run, getting into habits of overconsumption can be deleterious for your flourishing. That's a
Mm-hmm.
that's a reasonable
It's a reasonable
story,
thing to
right?
say.
But does that mean like, oh, I'm gonna go to Jersey Mike's today and I'm working out, I'm usually pretty healthy, I'm gonna have a bag of Doritos? That's bad? No, of course not, right?
Mm-mm.
Enjoy them, man. I love Doritos. Love them. Do you put them on
Yeah,
your
and I think
sandwich or do you have them separately?
separately.
Yeah. You never put the Doritos on? That's good.
Oh man,
Mhm.
no, the Dorito. You want absolutely nothing in between your tongue and the
Dorito,
magical coating of chemicals on
dude.
the outside of the
Doritos,
Dorito.
they are amazing, man. Like, cause like I don't eat many Doritos, but every once in a while, when I do have that Dorito, I'm like, oh dang, son, I forgot how good this was.
Exactly, exactly. And you know what? If you had a very high protein, low calorie day that day, and you go, you know what? I worked hard. I need some energy. Eat some Doritos.
Yeah,
Whatever. You
yeah,
know, it's fat. It's carbs.
and
It's
like
not magic.
you got again, a lot of prudence is like looking back on past experience to make a good judgment now for the future, right? These are the three phases of prudence. Like looking back, what did I learn to make a judgment right now for hopefully more flourishing and be a better person in the future, right? And over time, hopefully you can kind of like learn yourself and like your how you respond to things. And if you like realize that, like, I mean, alcohol is a good example, right? I think there's a range here. Like if like you've
Mm-hmm.
got a history of alcoholism in your family and like you're the kind of person like even a little just sets you off, then yeah, you should probably be a complete abstainer, right?
Sure.
But that
Mm-hmm.
isn't everybody, right? Other people can drink with reasonable moderation, and there's no issue. So again, a lot of this is just person and experience dependent too, for sure.
There's a lot of there's starting to be kind of an anti-alcohol push, particularly in like the fitness community, where it's like, well, listen, man, it just even a drink or two down regulates your protein synthesis, and pretty dramatically by some studies. And it seems to be doing that, especially if you have it like right after a workout at the time when you want peak muscle synthesis. It's like, I totally get that argument. And if you really want the gains, yeah, probably lay off the alcohol.
Yeah,
I
if
get
you
that it
want to
can
be
make you
like a
more.
competitive like
Mm-hmm.
athlete or figure, like yeah, alcohol is probably best not to have it in there. Um, right, but that isn't most people. I think the biggest issue for alcohol is how it disrupts people's sleep. But again, if you're like
Yep.
pretty
Yep.
temperate and like
I think
right, yeah,
I've kind of thought a little bit about, in the Eucharist, we're given, Christ in the under the appearance and the accidents of bread and wine. It's like, could have been anything. Why bread and wine? And if you think about it, that is ye old ultra processed food, right? Like this is the most high tech food these guys have, right? Like you have to do large scale commercial agriculture. You have to transport this over to a place which is a mill, which is driven by wind or water or by animal power or by human power. It's typically far beyond anybody to own one of these things. So it has to be like a corporate use or a government use or some type of ownership. And then you have to bake it, which means you need these ovens. It's like, if you look at the Roman Empire, most of the wheat came from North Africa, and it shipped over. It's like this wild, it is ye old ultra processed food. And it's something which is the fruit of the earth and the fruit of human hands, as they say in the Mass. So it's like both of these things.
Yep.
And that actually makes it better and more suited for us, not worse and less suited for us. And it's interesting, we have this anti-gluten reaction just culturally. It's like, And then the other thing is, I think drinking wine teaches you something. And that is, it can enhance the time where you're drinking the wine and you're celebrating. It can enhance your ability to connect with others, people in community. And that's really where it's at its best. Like, those conversations in college where you're all and you're talking and you can connect with people a little bit better. Inhibitions are lowered, but it also comes at a cost later where you do feel groggy. You don't sleep as well. And I think that does teach you something that, all right, life comes with opportunities for great joy, and it also comes with pain. And I want you to drink both of them, right? And we often want to divide this off. We want to say, well, I want to choose my own, penitential thing, eating only meat. But it's kind of reversed with wine, where you don't get to choose whether or not you take on that headache the next morning.
Right.
It chooses for you, right? So it's kind of this reversed penitential kind of thing. But it can teach you to accept things, even if they're difficult. And that's just generally an important thing to do in life.
I think so, man. That's a good point.
Even a bellyache from having too much lactose. Just accept it. It's fine.
Right, yeah. I'll give myself one of those tonight. Some pizza. Right. Yeah. Good stuff, man. Well, this was definitely not all philosophy of religion, but it was a fascinating conversation.
It's, we had no idea what we were going to talk about today. So I still say it's under philosophy somehow. So it goes on the channel.
Well, I think we gave some good practical ideas for people, at least on the nutrition front, all very reasonable, all very much evidence-based, as people like to say in certain fitness circles. So if nothing else, hopefully they got some just ideas to, maybe eat a little bit better in a sane and prudent way.
There you go. Cool. All right. Well, let's start wrapping it on up. What are you doing after this, Pat?
I got to play some guitar, man. I got to play some guitar. Yeah, I'm in a Van Halen tribute band that was recently formed. And it's been kicking my butt. It's been really kicking my butt because it's Van Halen. So getting a full set together of Van Halen songs is a serious task, like 2 to 3 hours a day, kind of serious. And my hip hurts because of it. So,
goodness.
All right. Yeah.
Wow. The demanding life of an amateur musician.
Indeed. All for what? Well, as you said, leisure is important, right? In certain pursuits. So
bringing
joy to those party tent going Wisconsinites. That's what it's all about, right? So
all their cheese hats and everything. Yeah.
So
Good stuff.
And then I'll read some philosophy, and that'll be, and then we'll hang out. It's Friday. It's always like to do. I don't know. Maybe we'll do around a Mario Party with the kids tonight. You want to test family bonds, man? Mario Party is the game to do it. See if you guys are well knitted or not. Yeah. So we're gonna give that a run tonight. That'll be about it.
I just still have just the little 1-year-old. I don't think he's ready for Mario quite yet. But awesome, man. Cool. Did you read the bazillion things on the email I sent in response to your article?
Not yet. I will get to it. I've got many millions of things I have to get through. It's on the list, but it shall be attended to at some point.
Cool. I've been, oh my goodness, what have I been reading? I guess I've been reading some Albert the Great recently. Have you read much of him?
No. I know of him, generally his work, and obviously who he influenced, but not a lot directly. Yeah.
So I know this much more than that because I just read a very small amount of him. And what I found interesting is he goes hard after people using their imaginations for pretty much anything.
Oh, does he? Yeah.
It's like, it's lowering you to the level of the beast. Don't use your imagination of things. Just recollect the fact of God and his existence and cling to God instead, not through images or phantasms,
Mhm.
as befits an animal, but exercise your rational mind, know him, and then love him with your will. It's just like, man, this sounds really freaking hard. And it's like the absolute polar opposite of like a nation spirituality. Just
Mhm.
like, no. It's put yourself in the moment, use your imagination, use these faculties, find God in that. Poles apart. I don't know who's right. No idea. But I think it's interesting because you don't really hear that kind of Albert
No, I can't
anti-imagination
say
perspective.
that's too popular of a theme these days. But hey, I don't know. Maybe it works for
No,
someone, right?
maybe so. Exactly. Cool, Pat. Good chat
Always
as
great,
always.
Jake. Appreciate it,
An
and appreciate
episode,
your audience.
indeed. Oh, the audience. Audience, write in the Gordianot101 at gmail.com. Things good, things bad, things in between. Questions for the mailbag. Cool. All right. Talk to you later.